Hi, I'm Paul Peterson.
I'm Chris Sun Liu. This is Civil Rights 2, Part 3. We're going to be talking about gay rights. Professor Peterson, previously we talked about the Bowers v. Hardwick decision and how it was later reversed in Lawrence v. Texas. Just to review, what is the general trend in public opinion towards gay rights, and how does that explain how the court departed from stare decisis?
Well, as you recall, Chris, the position of the court changed on the sodomy issue in a very short period of time, and the Supreme Court reversed its earlier decision in Lawrence. And you can see in this graph here, which we showed previously, that there was an increase from 60% to 95% of the public taking a position saying that homosexuals should have equal rights. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the public is that supportive of gay marriage, because Congress passes a law denying federal recognition of gay marriages in the 1990s, and it has never reversed that decision, even though there's plenty of pressure on Congress to do something like that. Instead, Congress has left it up to the states.
Now, a recent headline-grabbing case regarding gay marriage is the DOMA case. So what were the facts here, and what did the court decide?
Well, here's a situation where you can't leave the federal government out of the picture because it's the federal government that provides Social Security benefits to people. And the issue comes up, well, all right, so you have a lesbian couple that's married under the laws of some state, or in this case, it was in Canada. And so they were married before they came into the United States, and the one member of the couple had passed away, and so Windsor files for federal estate tax exemption as a surviving spouse. And the IRS decides that she's not entitled to this exemption because she's not actually married. They say that according to federal law, a spouse is a person who has a heterosexual relationship, a heterosexual marriage. So given that decision by the IRS, and it's a pretty big decision because it affects not only federal estate taxes, but it's going to affect Social Security benefits as well. Windsor files the suit, it goes into the courts, it reaches the Supreme Court, and it's going to be a pretty big decision that the court's going to have to decide.
And what did the Supreme Court decide in what turned out to be an important case?
Well, Chris, it was a very close call. There were 4 votes that said the federal government has never recognized gay marriages. In fact, it has a law against it. This couple may have been married in Canada, but that doesn't give them rights within the United States, and it doesn't give them rights to the federal benefits. But it turned out that there was a majority for Windsor, saying that it was a denial of the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment. It violated the liberty that this couple had, and the key vote was the Kennedy swing vote that turned out to be in favor of gay rights.
As we discuss same-sex marriages, Professor Peterson, it's hard to leave out the state of California, where this issue has evolved in a very interesting way. What is the history behind same-sex marriage in California?
Well, Chris, what's interesting about how the issue of gay marriage has evolved is it's become a state-by-state issue, with different states having different views. And in California, you have a Supreme Court, a fairly liberal Supreme Court, which ruled that bans on same-sex marriage violated the state constitution, not necessarily the federal constitution, but the state constitution. So they said gay marriage is legal. Well, the voters in 2008 didn't like that. They passed a proposition, Proposition 8, which overturned the court decision. Well, the state court then decides once again that Proposition 8 is unconstitutional. So this is the California Supreme Court that's declaring Proposition 8 unconstitutional. So they're basically saying the voters can vote whatever they want, but we'll decide whether it's constitutional or not. That's a pretty strong position by the California Supreme Court. So the plaintiffs think they've got a great case to take to the U.S. Supreme Court. They're saying the state court has to abide by the decision of the voters. So what is the Supreme Court going to decide?
It's interesting because this case was handed down actually on exactly the same day as the U.S. versus Windsor case. So how did the Supreme Court decide this time?
Well, this case, they duck. And one way, the Supreme Court can duck issues too. And one way to duck an issue is to say, well, the person who brought the lawsuit actually doesn't have standing. And then in this case, it was somebody who had voted for Proposition 8. Well, does a person who voted in an election have standing if a court says, well, the results of that election don't stand? Well, it was a complicated issue, and the court split in many different ways. And so if you look at the majority in this case, it's not your typical majority. You have Scalia and Roberts voting with Ginsburg and Breyer and Kagan. And on the dissenting side, you have Sotomayor siding with Kennedy and Thomas and Alito. But yet there's a duck here. So we really don't yet know how the Supreme Court is going to rule on state decisions with respect to gay marriage.
Professor Peterson, what is an interesting and important takeaway here?
Well, in the most recent issue that has come up before the Supreme Court, there is an instance where the appeals court in one jurisdiction has said that state laws banning gay marriage are unconstitutional. And there's very likely going to be a decision in another circuit court of appeal that says that this is not the case, that you cannot declare state laws unconstitutional on this topic. So you're going to have two federal circuit courts of appeal ruling in diametrically opposed ways sometime during 2014, very likely. And it's going to be up to the Supreme Court to decide this question or to leave the country with an unsettled law without a unified legal system. So fundamentally, it seems as if the Supreme Court has to decide whether it can afford to duck issues like this or whether it has to take the responsibility of unifying the U.S. legal system by coming up with a definitive position on whether states can ban gay marriages. Stay tuned.
Next time, we'll talk about foreign and defense policy.